Welcome to Called to Lead, a podcast series on pastoral leadership for today's church, presented by the Markey Center in Santa Clara University's graduate program in pastoral ministries. I'm your host, Dr. John Rinaldo. Join us and explore leadership in the Catholic Church through stories and conversations with pastors, ministers, and scholars. We connect theology with real-world ministry, highlighting how today's leaders answer God's call to build just and inclusive communities. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Called to Lead. And as always, I am so excited for our guest today. I have with me the Executive Director of the National Catholic Partnership on Disability, Charleen Katra. Charleen, welcome to Called to Lead. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for the invitation, John.
It's so great. The work that you do with the National Catholic Partnership on Disability, I think is so essential. And I think in some ways a little bit of a secret in the Catholic community. And so I am so excited that you're going to break this open with us and let us know about the incredible resources that you are providing and the work that you are doing across the country to help Catholic parishes and Catholic dioceses within this ministry. So, Charleen, let's get right to it. You've spent more than 2 decades in ministries with persons with disabilities. What first drew you to this work, and what has sustained your commitment to keep doing it?
It was specifically one young man who had Down syndrome, whose parents brought them to our parish decades ago to be prepared to learn his faith and to be prepared for sacraments. Someone, a leader at that parish, knew that I had a background in special education, though I wasn't using it at that time, and asked me if I would teach Brandon. So that intersection of being a cradle Catholic and having a special ed degree was a God thing. I wouldn't on my own probably have ever thought to put those two together. But it was because of Brandon being presented at our parish that, again, the invitation, as always, to get usually us started in a ministry, came to me. I willingly accepted it. Again, for me, with my background, it was very easy to meet Brandon and see how to kind of adjust the curriculum to fit his academic level of need.
And it's especially important with sacramental preparation, especially although we do faith formation beyond sacramental preparation. But one of the questions that I often get, certainly in my work teaching at Santa Clara University, is how do we serve those within sacramental prep, who have these needs? So before we kind of delve into that, some listeners may not be familiar with the term adaptive ministry. So how would you define that term, and what makes it distinct from maybe just a simple accommodation?
I think the big distinction for me is that you're actually meeting a real need and it's very individualized. So yes, we can build a ramp and a ramp can serve many people, and that's a universal design concept for, a physical building, and we are advocates of that. But yet then there's all the different people that might use that ramp, and their needs and why they use a ramp would be very different one to the next. Very similar with someone with autism or Down syndrome or cerebral palsy, etc. Though they may have a same name diagnosis or disability, their lived reality with it is very different one from the next, and that goes across the board. So when you're doing adaptive ministry, you are really basing it on the actual real need that's presented to accommodate that person in the most successful, and I would hope to say most pastoral way possible for church,
In
which is a
the
little more, I guess, just individualized in particular.
Well, I was just thinking in education, we often use the term IEP, right? Individual Educational Plan, right? And so in some ways, it is a little bit of that, but within the context of pastoral ministry. Tell me, when we talk about disabilities, I think a lot of people think physical disabilities first. That's probably what comes to mind most. But in your work, especially in church, what are some of the most common disabilities that we are seeing in church ministry that we should be adaptive to? And name some of them, and help me, especially because I'm uneducated, explain some of these disabilities so I understand exactly what they are.
I would say we do have a physical disability committee to respond to needs of persons with physical disabilities, whether it's from hearing loss to vision loss to using wheelchairs or walkers or other situations like that in particular. We could also probably put in that category dementia and Alzheimer's and some of those other diagnoses too, that again, some of these are visible and some of these are invisible. And that's a whole nother conversation we can talk about more too. But then I would say currently, be just based on the rise, unfortunately, the rise of diagnosis in two specific areas in the world, no different in church, is the rise of the diagnosis of autism and mental illness. So, on those two fronts, we really are very, very busy all the time trying to put out more resources and training to help church leadership in particular, clergy included, understand those disabilities or diagnoses and again, know how to respond to them in ways that are helpful and not hurtful.
I'm glad you mentioned mental health because I did not think of mental health concerns, particularly as a disability. In my mind, for better or worse, I kind of put it in this other category. There's been a lot of data to suggest that with the onset of the internet-based childhood, that's a term I steal from Anxious Generation, which is a great book. You should all read it, right? With the internet-based childhood that really came into play in the 2009, 10, 11, 12, that mental health, and we've seen this across the board, mental health issues, particularly with young people, but certainly adults as well, has increased. How would you respond to a parish to say, we have an epidemic, for lack of a better term, of mental health, and what can I, as a pastoral minister, what can I, as a pastor, do in this situation?
Again, right now, NCPD is currently working in collaboration with the Herman Center for Innovative Education for Catholic Schools. Together, collectively, we have started about a year ago a national Catholic school mental health collaborative. So it is focused specifically on what currently is existing for Catholic schools to meet their needs. Not that we don't all need it across all lenses of church, but this initiative is focused really on the Catholic schools. And I'll tell you what we're finding. There are a lot of resources available, not so much with a Catholic lens, though. So clearly, for us as church, we would like to put that Catholic identity on top of even if it's existing resources to not maybe recreate the wheel. But what's also important is in what we're realizing and learning and hearing more and more is the educators themselves may be struggling with mental health issues or their loved ones. So it almost seems like we were kind of starting to turn a corner and realizing whatever we're going to do as we're still beginning this initiation of this collaborative is it may be focused more on adult faith formation, meaning giving resources and information both to the teachers, the actual educators offering direct service, as well as the leadership. So that we're making sure that they're healthy because, again, the adage, you can't give what you don't have. But we're just realizing it's across the board. And it might be better to start with the adult faith formation to really seek and reach their students more effectively. So that's
Certainly,
one thing. I mean, another thing on mental health in particular, and even in this Catholic schools, of course, is naturally, I would say, a level of awareness of sincere listening, which we know is huge in the church right now, synodal listening. So more listening, maybe less talking, so that we can really hear people's stories. And that to me would go hand in hand also with other disabilities where processing may be delayed. So you truly do have to slow down when you ask someone a question because they need time to process your question. They will also need additional time to process and answer if they're able to give you an answer verbally. So I always say, people with disabilities call us to slow down. And truly, for most of us, that's a very good thing and usually very needed.
that would be very hard for me to do. I think I run I run I feel like I run very quickly, and so the idea of slowing down, I think, is really important. Thank you for naming that. So, in your experience, where does the church often fall short when it comes to serving persons with disabilities? And what shifts can help move our communities from accommodation toward true belonging?
First part is, I hate to say it, but sometimes we're our own worst enemy in the sense of some of the barriers that we work to remove are attitudinal barriers. And as much as you think good Christian Catholics, surely not. But again, maybe it's in our rush, maybe it's in our, don't want to look at disability because it reflects back to us our own humanity and mortality and other things, weaknesses, brokenness, because truth be told, we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, right? So in essence, we all have disabilities, named or known or unknown, visible or invisible. So I think there's a part of that there that if you don't talk about attitudinal barriers, And again, slow down enough to self-reflect on that, either collectively as a parish or a faith community, or even as an individual or a family. It's hard to move past them because sometimes you don't even know you're exhibiting them.
Mhm.
But yet, by behaviors, we can see that you are. So the person who is blind, who's standing on the corner, and a young mother and a child comes near them. I've had a person who is blind tell me this story, and they hear the mother. The child may say to the mother, "What's that white cane? What's that? Why do they have a white cane?" And the mother will say, kind of like, "Be quiet, let's go," and take them away. As opposed to the person who is blind telling me the story later saying, I would have loved to had the mother let the child ask me the question directly so I could have talked to them myself and told them more about my disability. But the message, again, from an outsider, even hearing that story, you realize that the message that the parent sends or an adult sends when they shut down a conversation and move someone away, maybe out of their uncomfortableness, kind of sends a message that it's a problem, there's something wrong, we got to get away, move away, as opposed to being a little more relaxed with it. I often say a lot of what we do is just lowering people's frustration levels or anxiety levels, and you do that sometimes by just giving them more information and education.
Certainly, I know we need that. It is awkward. I know I've been in situations where I don't know how to respond or act, and then we just it's fight or flight, and we often flight, right? In terms of that,
Yes.
I'm glad you named that because you are calling me out, which is a beautiful thing, Charlie. Thank you so much. So, um, what is I know we've been talking about the definition of disability quite broadly with mental health and other things, but looking at the general population of the U.S., assuming that our parishes in some way mirror the general population, what percentage of people in the general U.S. population might be considered having a disability? And do you find that that number mirrors in parishes as well?
When I say disability, I always kind of explain it as because there's so many. I like to put it under four categories. So there's physical, there's intellectual, there's behavioral, and emotional. So if you kind of can break the umbrella of the word disability down into those four categories, then more things can be kind of parsed out. But it statistically, they would say the world, and no different in church, probably in these days pushing probably closer to 30% of any population has a disability or diagnosis. And as you said, sometimes people look at even our own Council on Mental Illness and Wellness. There's been great debate of why is this under disability? Why does this ministry, in light of mental illness and wellness, fall under disability? And again, I say to people, I don't refer to that as a disability. I usually would use the term diagnosis. So there's a little differentiation there, possibly, but for the time being, anyway, in church, that's where the USCCB has put it. So that's
Mhm.
where why we have it under NCPD. That statistic, when you say, are they do you see that in a parish? I would tell you, even your own parish would probably say, no, I do not. No, I do not see it. Partly because some are invisible. That's one part. But there's more than that. Even with being invisible, I still, even today in 2026, you will hear people say, well, I don't have anyone in our parish, Charlene, with disabilities. And statistically, we know it can't be true because of all the invisible ones, right? So all the mental health, those people, I say to clergy, do you realize how many people in front of you when you're preaching and presiding at Mass are struggling with mental illness issues, maybe mental health themselves, or are certainly probably in church praying for their loved ones who are? Or the elderly, or not even necessarily elderly, but anyone who's struggling with hearing loss, who without a listening device is not even hearing your homily anymore. And they don't even realize how much they have hearing loss sometimes. If it's an aging issue, happened to my own father that way. Walked out of Mass once at a parish when we were traveling and said they gave him an assisted listening device. He walked out and told us he hadn't heard the homily in years. We were just, here's this Catholic family. This man's a devout Catholic. He had no idea how much he wasn't hearing when he was in church, or he wasn't able to or wanting to express it yet. I don't know, but so to tell clergy that, and then look at autism again, an invisible disability. So you've got folks that sitting next to each other close by, a veteran similar. I've had a veteran tell me this too. I almost wish we could go back, Charlene, to when it was the pandemic when we had a six feet apart from each other, because I'm triggered by so many people in some of the parishes that are very, very vibrant and have a lot of people attending. Good news. That can be very triggering, maybe, let's say, for this veteran who shared that story with me in recent years. Or again, like I said, someone maybe on the autism spectrum who likewise does not like people too close to their personal space and would like more airspace around them. Again, so just giving people options and maybe even being, for the rest of us, even being conscious when we move in a pew, ask, can I sit here as opposed to getting too close, even on a busy mass day? So all those little things that just small sensitivities help. Sensory friendly masses has gotten much more popular, thank God, nationally, and sensory friendly adoration is something new and coming along behind that, that is just allowing more worshipers to be engaged.
I mean, potentially you're talking 3 and 10, right? Potentially, right? On the
Yes.
higher end of the people in the pews. Now, you mentioned sensory masses and sensory perception. So, yeah, and I've heard the story from other ministers as well. The mass in and of itself, it can be, you mentioned the word triggering, but can be a barrier just the way it's set up, whether how many people are in there, the lights, the music, all those things play a role. When you talk about sensory masses, because I think that may be an area that some parishes could pursue, what does that look like? What do we need to pay attention to when it comes to the sensory aspect of mass?
Yeah. We have a lot of online library of courses, growing library of online courses that people can really jump into and learn much more about this at their leisure. But for sensory friendly masses in particular, I always say think low sensory. So in general, you're trying to tone down the bank of lights. In a church sanctuary, you might have an option to not put them all on fully. So if you can use some banks of lights and not all of them, that's already one nice adjustment. The music, though we love the music, and that typically is known to enhance liturgy, or that's certainly always the goal. Um, you still want it to be kind of low sensory too. So quieter, and intentionally so. I've had people leave a sensory friendly mass that weren't there and didn't need it for themselves, having a need, but would leave. Inevitably, it happens. The rest of the population walks out going like, that was amazing. That was like being on retreat. I mean, it's more prayerful. Maybe it's quieter, it's dimmer lighting, etc. You do ask even presiders and lectors to not speak quite maybe as loudly as they normally may otherwise for this community. I jokingly say, but probably rightly so, that you ask the clergy to maybe tighten up the homily so the mass maybe 45 or 50 minutes versus an hour if possible, because again, length of time can be challenging for some folks to sit in a mass setting that long. And kind of the joke that maybe everybody would like that. So we have that opportunity too to ask them again, maybe again shorter readings. Maybe something is the psalm is proclaimed and not sung. Anything that can kind of tighten up the mass timeline even truly is. And then you want to have a lending library, so to speak, in the narthex when people come into such a mass. You don't need for everybody, but a small quantity of large print worship aids would be ideal. Assisted listening devices, I would have some of those available for some that might want to use those during that mass. A basket of fidgets, so little handheld, quiet manipulatives. And honestly, we already have that built into our church. We have the rosary. I always say the original fidget, right? So have a basket of rosary. So those who want to hold a rosary during Mass, though sometimes it looks like someone's not paying attention because they're doing something like that. For some people, that holding that item absolutely gives them the benefit of being able to focus where they couldn't otherwise. Wiggle seats are another option. You could have a selection of a few, like puffed up hard rubber pillow seats that are sold for this purpose, usually used in more educational retreats or classroom settings. But you just, no different. Again, I've had told priests, I had one priest say, I'll put those in the pews. Again, I said, maybe everybody would like them, but you're able to kind of wiggle while you work, so to speak, or pray in this case. So all those options, maybe just having some volunteers that are willing to be buddies to sit with someone. So even a family can be attentive to Mass than they usually are, where someone else would be with their loved one, helping them if they need be, or just, attending to them.
That's so
There's lots of
beautiful.
things we can
Yeah.
do.
Thank you for explaining that because it's beautiful because we often talk about using church speak that the Mass and the Eucharist are source and summit. Yet the way the Mass is set up in and of itself can actually restrict people from participating, And so what we're talking about is creating these inclusive environments where everybody can participate in the source and summit of our faith, nourished by word and by sacrament, right? Is really a beautiful thing. Oh my gosh, we could keep talking about sensory
I know, right?
friendly masses. So you said there are resources on the website ncpd.org that people could take a look at. So if you're listening to this and want to find out more, definitely go check out the website. I've been perusing the website recently in the past week, and there's a lot of amazing resources. I know you've got some great committees who are doing some great work for you as well.
Or-
Let's switch subject here from moving away from mass now to things like sacramental prep and catechetical programs. What does adaptive faith formation look like in practice, especially when preparing children or adults for sacraments?
Golden rule, in my opinion, because it's gospel values, is we want everybody together as much as possible. I've seen over my decades in disability ministry very rare and few occasions where a person with a disability or a diagnosis could not be fully included in existing rooms. So, as opposed to the past, where as soon as someone heard or saw someone had a special, and I don't use the term special needs, I usually use the term greater needs, has a greater need, that they would automatically want to either send the parent home with a resource to catechize them at home, which granted, a parent has the right to do that, of course. But again, we want to build community, and building community is having them involved in existing rooms and mass and retreat and with the full life of the church. So, in that regard, buddy systems is ideal for faith formation in particular. Asking young adults, I say young adults in a parish campus, in particular, and any confirmation commandee that are confirmandi, excuse me, that are preparing for that sacrament, maybe in the high school ages, should be offered this ministry as one of many ministries in the church to get start participating in as we do so, in hopes that once they're confirmed an adult in the church, that they would have found where their gifts are a good fit for the church and continue in a ministry as an adult. So being a buddy for someone with a disability or a diverse learner is an ideal way for because you'll help that young person or that youth, I would say, early identify some of their own gifts of patience, compassion, empathy, social justice, heart, that it's already evident in them at a young age. And we kind of have I'd say, the blessing of helping to call that out in them sooner than life to help them realize it maybe. And I guarantee, though I always say I don't know their future, but I know their future. If they respond to serve as a buddy for someone in a younger grade maybe chronologically their same age, but working at a lower level for this ministry, they will in 5 years, I almost without seeing it, know that they'll end up in a healthcare field, special ed field, social worker field. They're going to end up in some semi-related field as an adult because of that experience. And I've heard it repeated to me backwards afterwards, years later too, from many. So that's a truth. So that's just an easy best practice. Obviously, you do want, again, attitudinally catechists who are trained and offered training on this ministry because most catechists are volunteers. Good Catholics want a hand on the faith, dedicated to the church. Most of them are not trained educators by formal education, let alone formally trained in special education. So they do need to know what resources exist and possibly how to use them and tips and tools on all of that. Again, NCPD offers that remotely on our online courses, and of course we are also often out in dioceses, out training, and where they may be able to come and see us in person as well and learn. So there's that for the faith formation side. When it comes to sacramental prep, clearly a critical need in the church for us because if a family is going to present a child for nothing else, they'll come for sacraments, of course, if you're a Catholic family, especially if your child may have more involved disabilities and diagnoses. Yes, even for the family, that can be challenging to have them included in faith formation and run the gamut of all the expectations for church, even to receive sacraments. Now, keeping in mind the church has always said that, but the more recent documents are emphatical in saying no one can be denied sacraments. Okay, that's a truism. So with that said, how do we prepare and celebrate that sacrament in different ways. Um, there's some baselines for sacraments, just quickly. Baseline for, I'll go run through them fast. Reconciliation, can the person discern between right and wrong? That's the question.
Mm.
If the answer is no, they can't, we go right to First Eucharist. Now, that's not the typical norm, but in this case, yes. Eucharist, can they distinguish between Jesus and regular bread? Jesus and the host and regular bread. That's a baseline. And remember, these are baselines. So if they can learn more, we definitely want to keep teaching them. But otherwise, that's the goal. And then confirmation, of course, that we're just teaching them that they're receiving the Holy Spirit. Obviously, they're kind of receiving the Holy Spirit again since they already received that baptism. But these are baselines. But at least it tells people, okay. And then from there, again, that individualized piece comes in. If someone is very involved and seriously, has needs that are so great that, their preparation could be just a few lessons. It doesn't have to be because the parish does 9 months, it has to be 9 months, or confirmation is typically 2 years. Well, no, some of our families that's in their individuals, it's not going to be their opportunity to do that successfully. We had in Galveston, Houston, where I was overseeing disability ministry for decades, an adapted confirmation prep program where we had neurotypical youth from the parish that we prepared the other students at be buddies for them throughout their preparation. And their preparation, instead of 2 years, was 9 months. It was one meeting a month from 3 to 5 on a Saturday. Their retreat was one family retreat where the whole family was together from lunch at noon till the vigil mass at 5 o'clock. That was their retreat. So again, adapt, adapt, adapt. It doesn't have to be as strenuous as everyone else if there's a real need to do otherwise.
I love that. And I know when I talk with pastoral leaders, we often it's like we got to follow the guidelines from the diocese or whatever. But even within the guidelines itself, there's so much vagueness. I don't mean that in a negative way. There's so much ability to adapt for those who need that, for disabilities, but even for anyone, depending on where they're at in their journey. That's a really beautiful thing. And I also love that you mentioned training for catechists. You said that. And that's really up to like the children's faith formation director or the youth minister director or whatnot to find those resources. Again, go to ncpd.org. You'll find a ton there. To be able to do that as part of your training and orientation for your core team, for your catechists, for your leaders. I think that's essential because, again, like you said, most of us don't have it. I love what you're saying. A lot of this is about inclusion and integration, right? So let's not separate folks out from the community if we don't have to. And you're saying in most cases, we don't have to. And as we talk about being what it means to be an inclusive church, this is an aspect of this. And so let's flip the script a little bit here. What do persons with disabilities teach us and the wider church about faith, community, and discipleship? Because I'm sure we can teach them, but I suspect they can teach us a lot as well, right?
I think they can teach us more than we can ever teach them, hands down. Um, I'll say it this way. I had a scholar in our Scholars Symposium a couple years ago that said this one line, and I'm going to share it with you because it kind of brings this home. She said, my child has trouble with abstract concepts. I have trouble with forgiveness. Who has the disability? I mean, mic drop, right? I mean, I was
Yes.
just like, that summed it up. I mean, so for all of our abilities, for those of us who might have more than someone else, as I said earlier, we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. It's not a matter of because I walk in a straight line or I speak without a stutter or whichever I might have that someone else may not have that ability makes one better than the other, like I said. And what people with disabilities, in my opinion, if you are blessed to have them in your life, and many of you listening probably are, you will be nodding your head yes. If you live with them, if you again are blessed to be in their presence, you will see Christ. You will see peace. You will see love, joy. So many of the things that, the rest of us are always striving for, and oftentimes unsuccessfully in our own missteps, but yet they are really, I find them extremely close to the Lord and the Lord extremely close to them. And that if we allow them to, they can help us learn patience and compassion and mercy and generosity and all the things that, again, we're supposed to be Christ-like. They are, they emanate it all the time.
I love that. Thank you so much for that. I needed to hear that. I think a lot of people need to hear that. Last question for you. If a parish or diocesan leader is listening in and realizing they need to grow in this area, what is one faithful first step they can take to begin to move in this direction?
I mean, I will say, pray for God to use them. Pray for God to use them, well, to bring about his kingdom on earth, right? Um, just be open to that and then buckle up, I guess is what I could say. Because I think when you ask, God will happily respond to that prayer. So you will be changed. You will be, as my old boss, Cardinal Donardo, used to say, if you've met Jesus Christ, you're not unemployed. You will have a job, right? So you're going to be giving things. God will present things for you to do, to be involved in the ministry. Maybe you're called to be an advocate for persons with disabilities at your parish. We need those, you look at a parish, excuse me, you look at a parish bulletin and you see, the Knights of Columbus and the Guadalapanas and all the other ministries that a parish may have, the faith formation office. Where's the name and number for someone that's a disability advocate or something to where if I have a child with a disability or I am a person with a disability and I come to your parish, I see myself. Or I have an immediate connection to someone that probably knows local resources I want to know, or other families and individuals I want to know. And those are those parishes. I think you asked me earlier, and I may have passed by the answer, but I remember you saying something about what is it about parishes that maybe that are more vibrant and more successful in this ministry. And I think that's one of it is they are proactive in and intentional in looking for who's missing, which is hard to see who's missing because you don't see them, right? But you really have to again take it to prayer and try and discern who your community is. And if people are missing, how can you make your welcome mat larger? I've been in meetings where I've had parents these days, everybody's on phones. So they're on their phone and they're saying, Charlene, I'm on this parish website. There's nothing on this website that tells me they're going to teach my child their faith because my child has a disability. I mean, those are notes for all of us to take to heart, especially if we're in any area of influence in the life of a parish. So websites, registration forms from the parish registration form to anything that you're hosting or offering at your parish, there ought to be just a simple question. Do you need any, does the person filling out the application or for their family, any accommodations needed? It's a very non-threatening question. If they don't know what the question means, it's probably a mute point and they'll move on. But those who need it understand that question and might say, I need an ASL interpreter, I need, etc. Or my child needs more time to do their work. They need twice as much time to do half as much work. They'll know the answer if we ask the question.
I love it. Charlene, we could be talking for a lot longer here. This has been so good. Charlene, I appreciate you joining us today. Definitely, if you're listening and want to learn more, definitely visit ncpd.org, National Catholic Partnership on Disabilities. That's Charlene's the executive director of that organization. Lots of resources there available for you, webinars, trainings, and I believe every diocese have a contact person as well? Is that the case?
They do not. That is that I
Okay.
wish we pray for that.
Okay.
About half of the dioceses in the US are affiliate members of NCPD, and
Okay.
doesn't mean there's not good things going on in the others. So we're always continuing to grow that base of having strong connections in more dioceses. Often that person that oversees this ministry is typically, if they don't have a office in its own right or a person designated, it's typically found in the faith formation office or a pro-life or social ministry office is what we find. It varies across dioceses.
Mhm.
And lastly, I will say I was blessed to be invited to write a book a few years ago, and that book is called The Adaptive Teacher: How to Reach and Teach Diverse Learners. So that's another resource that sold itself. Loyola Press printed it in 2019, and it's won 6 awards in the Catholic publishing
Oh,
industry. It sold itself. So if that's helpful for people too, just know about that.
Congratulations, Charleen. Thank you again for joining us today. My
Thanks,
guest
Tom.
today is the Executive Director of the National Catholic Partnerships on Disabilities, Charleen Katra, doing incredible work over there. So definitely look into all the incredible things that the organization is offering. Again, thank you, friends, for joining us for another episode of Called the Lead. Presented by the Markey Center for Leadership and Ministry at Santa Clara University's graduate program in pastoral ministry. If you would do us a favor, subscribe, follow, so you always get the next episode in your fingertips, at your phone. That would be greatly appreciated. And until next time, God bless you all. Have a wonderful day.